Hi team, you know what it is, we are back with another dose of spiritual bleach. Nice easy one today. We are going to look at why the universe exists and why the universe exists in the way that it does. Why is manifestation even here? And why does manifestation behave and act and appear in the way that it does? Very common question. It's been asked throughout all of human history. Very prevalent question in philosophy, spirituality, metaphysics, science, all of that good stuff. Let's answer it, and let's answer it today. If I'm speaking a little slower today, it's for a few reasons. Firstly, this whole area, this whole subject is very slippery for the mind to grasp. And so if I'm giving a little extra space between pointings, it's just to allow the point to just land, and I invite you to just contemplate a little, even if it's not 100% understandable cognitively, just giving a little space to understanding the general broad concept that is being pointed towards. This also gives me a little bit of breathing space to queue up the next point and ensure that I've queued up the next point accurately and concisely, because I have become aware that I have a tendency to go off on a little tangent or two. I have been known to digress slightly, and just giving myself a bit of space, it means I don't go off on the tangents quite so much. Going off on tangents is due to just trying to buy myself some time, essentially. So if I go quiet for a longer period of time, it's so that you can allow the concept to just percolate a little through your being, through your understanding, and you will know that I'm just ensuring the next point I make is concise, relevant, and on topic. It's also that whenever I'm filming these, I enter a kind of meditative state myself, because it's almost like I'm talking myself through the concept at the same time, and occasionally I accidentally enter the state of no mind. You might have seen this in a few of my videos. And obviously when you're in the state of no mind, it becomes quite difficult to speak. So I'm just giving myself some space and time to ensure that doesn't happen. So let's dive right into it here. Before we do, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, please. And remember, channel memberships are available if you'd like to support me and my work. In order to understand why the universe is here and why it manifests the way that it does, we must first understand something called the unity of opposites. You may not have come across that phrase before, that term before, but let's take a look at something called the unity of opposites right here. And if we understand this concept, if we understand how the unity of opposites functions, we can then take that and apply it to why the universe is here, and even why consciousness operates the way that it does. And really interestingly, why we can't seem to find consciousness anywhere. Why we can't find where in the brain consciousness originates, right? It's because it doesn't originate in the brain, spoiler alert. But the unity of opposites. In order to explain the unity of opposites, we are going to look at temperature. We are going to use temperature as the example to explain how the unity of opposites functions. Essentially, one thing cannot exist unless its opposite also exists. We cannot know one thing unless we also know its opposite. And when it comes to temperature, let's take a look at how the coldness, cannot exist unless there is also something called heat. If it wasn't for the cold, there could be no heat, and if it wasn't for the heat, there could be no cold. Now we might say, but hang on, If I was God, let's say I was God, I probably could create a reality in which there was no heat. I can conceive of just pure cold and there never being such a thing as heat. I could kind of get my head around that. However, we have to really go into this. Let's really understand this. If there was no such thing as heat, we wouldn't be able to understand the cold as coldness. It wouldn't be coldness as such. It just is. It just would be. So it's by knowing what heat is that we can truly know what cold is. Now, you might think that this is kind of an argument for duality, because it would seem that coldness is very separate from heat. That cold could not be more different to heat. That the cold stands in literally polar opposite to heat. So therefore, these two things must be separate, right? But if we elevate our consciousness a little here, we can see that cold and heat fall under a much broader umbrella of temperature. Now, there could not be such a thing as temperature unless we had both cold and hot. If it wasn't for cold and hot, there would be no such thing as temperature. Could we understand that? Could we come to that understanding? That's fairly simple, right? That makes sense. There is a deal of common sense in that. So we have cold, we have heat. And at first glance, they appear to be two separate things. And even they appear to be two separate things that could not possibly be more different from each other. They are opposites. That's just how different they are from each other. And yet, when we zoom the picture out, we see that both cold and heat actually belong to the same spectrum. The cold and the heat belong to a much broader idea, a much broader thing called temperature. So that is what is meant by the unity of opposites. Unity, meaning both cold and heat are actually unified, despite the fact that they oppose each other. And if we go a little deeper into this, we recognize that it's the very fact that they oppose each other that creates this thing called temperature. You see what I mean about this being quite a difficult thing for the mind to kind of comprehend? But once we start really getting with that, once we start vibing with it, resonating with it, so to speak, we come to find it's actually it makes some kind of common sense. That does make some kind of sense. In the same way that you can't have up without down, you can't have left without right, you can't have hot without cold, you can't have day without night. Because if you were to take any one of those things, if it was just eternally day with no night, there'd be no such thing as day. It might be eternally light, it might be eternally bright, but we would have no concept of something called day because we wouldn't know what day's opposite was. Now, we see this everywhere. We see this everywhere in nature, We see this everywhere in physics. When one thing exists, its equal opposite exists. We see it in massive, broad, huge cosmological physics and metaphysics. We have matter and antimatter, for example. We also find it right in our very biology. We have male and female. Every animal has that. Isn't that interesting? We also find it in our own inner emotional and cognitive world. The emotions seem to have their equal opposites also. Happy and sad. You know, you feel up or you feel down. I feel really up today, or I feel really down today. Good, bad, you know. See, light, dark, up, down, left, right, and all around the houses. We see here the unity of opposites. One thing cannot be unless its opposite also is being. Are we getting somewhere? Unity of opposites. Beautiful. So how does this relate to why does the universe exist? And why does it exist in the way that it does? Well, let us begin by looking at impermanence. One thing we know about reality, about the manifest world that we observe, is that everything is temporary. Everything. Absolutely everything is temporary, meaning it comes and goes. It's here, then it's not here. It's not permanent. And everything is also constantly changing. Everything is constantly changing. Now, some things do move so slowly that to the human mind, it appears as though they're not changing. For example, if I was to look at a block of granite, I would say, well, that doesn't appear to be changing. That appears to be static. It appears to be still, and it appears to be permanent. It only appears that way to the human finite mind and the way that we are perceiving time very slowly. Whereas we might see something else, a raindrop falling, for example, and we can see very quickly that this thing is changing. Its state is changing, and it's very temporary. It's there, it hits the ground, and no more raindrop. Going past quite quickly. But with the granite block, yes, it is eroding. We know that it does. If we were to look at the remnants of ancient civilizations, we look at all their old statues and all their old buildings, we can see that they erode and decay. The worldly hopes man sets his hearts upon turns ash, and anon. Or it prospers, and anon, like snow upon the desert's dusty face, lighting a little hour or two, then is gone. Omar Khayyam. Or in the poem Ozymandias, where a statue has crumbled, and its face that had a crown and it had a sneering look on its face that was once this mighty, great, proud statue has now crumbled into the sand, and the head of this statue is all that remains of some once great civilization. And there's a plaque under the statue that reads, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair." But looking around, it's just sand and ruins. Nothing else remains. Everything is temporary, is the point I'm trying to get to there. So we can see, we don't have to go to some sort of massive, get a PhD in physics to see that everything that appears is temporary. We know that people are temporary, sadly. We know that life comes and goes. We know this. We know this. We know that everything is constantly flowing, constantly changing, coming, going, ephemeral, so to speak. temporary. We don't need a PhD in physics to know this. We can see this. We witness this with our own eyes. We witness ourselves changing over the years. You've already lived many lifetimes within one single lifetime. That's one that'll really bake your noodle. There it is. There's one of the phrases. If you've got your little Corin Bryant bingo card, there you go. You can tick off bake your noodle on that one today. Cheers. In fact, you can tick off two, because we're also going to do the coffee break, because it's getting super hot in here. Speaking of unity of opposites, super hot in here, super cold can of sterilised milk drink with coffee extract. Cheers. Not product placement. I just love this stuff. Oh, it's good stuff. Hits the spot. Right. So, why am I bringing up the temporary nature of all things? Well, bringing it back to the unity of opposites, if impermanence exists, its opposite must also exist. Permanence must exist. Because we couldn't know that something is temporary unless we also knew something that is permanent. This is how the unity of opposites works. The temporary nature of things, the impermanent nature of things, it would be impossible to understand the concept of temporary, the concept of impermanent, unless we also understood what permanent meant. As a little exercise here, interestingly, just try and think of one thing that is absolutely permanent. This is a very good meditative exercise in itself. Can you think of anything that is permanent, that does not come and go? It's just constant. Has anything in your life been constant that does not come and go? Or does everything come and go and change? Interesting little thought experiment, that one. Interestingly enough, I did a meditation class once and asked the class that. And someone said, yeah, I've got an answer. I was like, really? There's something permanent, is there? She said, yeah. I said, what? She said, permanent marker. That was quite a good answer. Obviously, yeah, permanent marker lasts for a very long time, but it's not eternal. It will fade and dissolve eventually. Everything dissolves into its constituent parts. The point is, if there is impermanence, we must also have permanence. It's getting so hot in here, I need to just wind the window down. Hopefully the outside noise won't distract us. So, I'm trying to get to why the universe is the way that it is, because we can see the manifest universe, and one thing that we know for certain about it is that everything is temporary. But in order for everything to be temporary, there must also be something that is permanent. But there is nothing that is permanent. Nothing. No thing that is permanent. No thing that is permanent. Nothing. Nothing. Nothing as a concept is permanent. Emptiness and void. That is permanent. Emptiness. Because the only real answer to the question that we could ever come up with is, what remains permanent is the space in which all things appear and disappear. In the same way that the weather appears and disappears within the sky, but the sky remains constant. The sky remains as the space in which all of the weather forms, stays a while, and then goes. we also find with the weather, it's a very good metaphor, by the way, the weather can take many different forms. There could be a few little light clouds, or there could be a mighty colossal storm, or it could be hail and snow, it could be heavy rain, it could just be blanket grey sky. So many different things that the weather could be. But the sky itself, this is important now, the sky itself doesn't ever change. The space may be filled with something, but it is still space. So there we start to come into how the unity of opposites can be applied to impermanence and permanence. Meaning, we can witness everything, all these changing forms that are coming and going. We can see that things are arising in space, forming in space. Even that concrete block, well, it exists right there, but it exists within space. It exists within empty space, but it does arise within it. It just arises within it, stays a while, and then goes. But the space that it arose within was space the whole time. It was space before the matter was there. It was space during while the matter was there, and it remains space after the matter has gone. So the space, emptiness, is the permanence that allows for the impermanence. Unity of opposites. Both of those things go together. You cannot have the permanent empty space unless there is its opposite, which is the impermanence of appearing forms within it. I'm going to just leave that for a second, just if that's hard to grasp, just go back to the weather in the sky. So we can understand that the weather can only appear because of the empty space of the sky. It can be a little harder to get to the concrete pillar can only exist because of the space that it arises in. Perhaps another metaphor would be you can only have a drawing if you have a blank piece of paper to draw on. Only ordinarily we only ever notice the drawing. We don't notice the blank paper. In the same way that when we look at this thing that we keep saying is the universe, why is the universe here? All we really see is matter. We see matter, we see people, we see stories, we see narratives, we see thoughts, we see emotions, but we don't notice the empty space in which all of this appears. Just give that a moment. It's not product placement, that's why I drink that coffee. I'm not sponsored by anyone. Other than the channel members, the very generous channel members who joined the channel membership. If you're feeling generous, please feel free to join that channel membership because, you know, I'm on my uppers here. So, the unity of opposites there is proving that we can only have... We can only have what we perceive as the universe can only manifest because there is the space in which the universe can manifest. And although we perceive all of the things that are temporary and changing, and ordinarily we don't notice the permanent empty space in which all of these things appear. So, perhaps this begins to go some way to explaining why the universe is the way that it is. We must first understand that the universe only appears that way if we are not noticing also its opposite. Now, just to develop slightly here as we've arrived here, because it's often asked, why would, if there's a creator of the universe, if there is Brahman, if there is infinite universal consciousness, whatever you want to call it, and this infinite universal consciousness or God is loving, what's with all the chaos? What's with all the turmoil? What's with all the bad stuff? Well, we have to recognize its opposite. We cannot have infinite peace unless there is also infinite chaos. Unity of opposites. In order for one thing to be there, we also have to know its opposite. And we can agree that the universe seems to be chaotic, meaning it's constantly changing. There appears to be turmoil everywhere, in the human world and in the world of space. Everything is constantly colliding, moving, shifting around, and we constantly ask ourselves, why? Why is it doing that? It is the very turmoil itself that gives rise to its opposite, peace. And this turmoil has to be infinite in order for there to be infinite peace. What is this infinite peace? This infinite peace is the awareness that is observing the turmoil. How could I possibly say that? Because awareness, witnessing turmoil, itself is not in turmoil. It is simply the witness of turmoil. Ask yourself, are you conscious now? Are you aware of your being now? Are you consciously aware of this present moment? And the conscious awareness that is aware of the universe does not appear in the universe. It is the one thing that does not appear within the universe. Consciousness. It's the only thing we can't see. We can't find it. It's not in the brain. They've looked. They can't find consciousness in the brain. It's not in the body. Where is it? We don't know. What is it? We don't know. How does it work? We don't know. Consciousness. And yet consciousness is the only permanent, ever-present element in all experience. It's the only one. It's the only thing that has been present throughout your entire life. And it's the only thing that has not changed. Your experiences are constantly changing. Your body is constantly changing. Your thoughts are constantly changing. The people around you is constantly changing. The world is constantly changing. Everything constantly changing. But your conscious awareness, meaning your awareness of all of these changes, the consciousness itself has never changed, not once. So consciousness is the sky in which the constantly changing forms appear. Right? So why does the universe exist? Because if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for the infinitely changing, infinitely chaotic and temporary forms and matter and all of the things that we witness, if it wasn't for those things that we witness, there could be no witness. In order for there to be a conscious observer, there has to be something that the conscious observer is aware of. In the same way, you couldn't have an audience, a spectator. So let's say you have the spectator of a football game, right? We know what the spectator of a football game is and what they look like. Somebody who sat there watching a football game. If there's no football game, you could not be the spectator of a football game. There has to be the football game in order for the spectator to exist. Right? We getting somewhere? So, in exactly the same way, if there wasn't the universe, if there wasn't the constantly changing forms in front of us that we witness, there could be no witness. There could be no consciousness unless there is something to be conscious of. In order for there to be a subject, there has to be an object. So why does the universe exist? The universe exists in the way that it does in order for consciousness to exist. Not that consciousness technically exists. Consciousness is the one thing that doesn't exist. Exist comes from the Latin existare, meaning to stand out, and consciousness is the one thing that doesn't stand out. Everything that we observe stands out of consciousness. Consciousness itself doesn't stand out. So consciousness doesn't exist. Why does consciousness not exist? Because unity of opposites, in order for something to exist, there has to be something that does not exist. Consciousness is what does not exist, and yet you are that consciousness. Paradox? Unity of opposites. Existence and non-existence, and consciousness is the one thing that does not actually exist. So in the same way that you cannot have the spectator of a football game without a football game, you cannot have consciousness that is aware of reality unless there is something that appears to be reality. So, why would a loving God, a loving creator, a loving infinite consciousness create a world of chaos so that you can witness chaos from the place of total peace, total serenity, total bliss, total joy, total order? But in order for those things to be there, and in order for you to be that thing, we have to have a universe of chaos, turmoil, and change in order for that to be there. In order for you to be infinite peace, there has to be something to witness that is not infinite peace. In order for there to be infinite turmoil, infinite chaos, there has to be infinite order. I think that's about as far as we can go. Although, it's always good to actually come to this experientially. Now that we've developed all of that, it's good to actually come to an experienced understanding. So not just a cognitive understanding. Because everything I've just used there, like even words, even thoughts, even concepts and ideas, they're all things that actually arise and manifest in the universe. Consciousness is what is aware of all of that rising, right? But the concepts and the words themselves ultimately are also temporary. They are also ever-changing, and they are also obviously fallible. So, this is why it's so important to actually have an experienced understanding. If we go to the consciousness itself and recognize that just like the sky is not changed by the weather, and the sky is necessary in order for the weather to arise, consciousness is necessary in order for any experience to manifest. But you can do this, you can experience this for yourself right here, right now. Go to the conscious awareness of experience. Become less interested in the content of experience, understanding that although you can witness experience, the witness itself is not experience. The witness is just the witness, and the witness is consciousness, your conscious awareness of being, that has been consciously aware of being your entire life, witnessing constant change, witnessing constant chaos, constant turmoil. You have changed a great deal over your entire life. But you can just be the conscious awareness that is watching all of this happen. And notice. Consciousness itself is not disturbed. The consciousness that witnesses even the unpleasant states is always peaceful. And that consciousness is permanent. Permanent. There has never been a time you were not conscious. You might say, yeah, but what about before this body and mind was here? What about before this life? Well, can you remember that? Can you remember that time? Obviously not, because there was no experience of this particular body-mind to be conscious of. But that's not proof that consciousness wasn't here. That's proof that the experience of a single body-mind wasn't here, but consciousness was here. So, unity of opposites. If there's one thing that exists, its opposite must also exist, otherwise it couldn't exist. And it certainly couldn't exist in the way that it does. So why does the universe exist? The universe exists because non-existence also exists. And non-existence is the space in which the universe appears, will stay a while, and then will go. The part that'll really bake your noodle is that non-existence is consciousness itself. And consciousness itself has to be non-existent. Why does consciousness have to be non-existent? Why is that the case? Because if consciousness appeared within the physical reality, if consciousness had a generator in reality and consciousness was there present in reality as a real, solid, tangible thing, then consciousness would be subject to all of the rules of that physical reality. If consciousness existed as a real, tangible, solid thing in reality, then it would have to be ever-changing, it would have to be temporary, and it would have to be subject to all of the the nightmarish rules of this reality. The infinite chaos, the infinite turmoil, the infinite pain of this reality. And let's not stand on ceremony here. We know how bad things get in this reality. This reality contains a great deal of suffering, right? So it's a massive blessing that consciousness does not arise within the universe as a real, solid, tangible thing. Because it's only by being outside of the universe, in the heavens, so to speak, that it can know infinite peace. Consciousness is infinitely at peace because it's not subjected to all of the rules of the temporary, finite, limited, seemingly separate phenomena. That is why consciousness is constantly peaceful. And that is why the universe is the way that it is. Because it has to be that way in order for the opposite to also exist. That's why anything is even here in the first place. Because, essentially, it's not. It's here because it isn't. Only in one of these videos could that sentence make sense. The universe is here because it's not here. Cheers. Just give me 1 second because I'm sure there's something I've missed. Said God to man. I'm sure there's something I'm missing. What is it? This is why we're so perplexed by the universe. Do you see how that works? Do you see how the universe can never fully be figured out? And no happiness can be found within the Maya, the illusory temporary world, the temporary, finite, ever-changing forms of reality. We'll never find permanent satisfaction, we'll never find permanent peace, we'll never find permanent happiness within the physical reality of the universe. Why is that? Because by its own nature, it is constantly changing and subjected to time, is subjected to finitude, finality, right? Mortality. That's what all of the stuff within the world that we experience is subjected to. So it can never be ultimately satisfying. That sounds good, doesn't it? Ultimately satisfying. Nothing in the physical world could be ultimately satisfying because somewhere we know, on some level, on the highest conscious level, we know that all things are subject to change and all things are temporary. So even if you found your perfect life partner, you would know that he or she is subject to change. Not the same person I married, right? You married them 5 years ago. They're a completely different person now, subject to change. And also temporary. Although I'm happy with this marriage, and yeah, sure, I'll stay with them my whole life. At a certain point, death do us part, right? So although it's the closest we can get to permanent happiness, it doesn't quite scratch the itch. So what to do? How on earth do we find permanent happiness, Corin? How? Please tell us. For the love of Brahman, how do we do that? Well, we look to the one thing that is permanent, which is consciousness. We look to the one thing that is not subject to change, consciousness. We look to the one thing that is not mortal, that is immortal, which is consciousness. When you abide as consciousness, unmixed with the experience of the temporary manifest world, presto bingo, oh, I was happy all along anyway. Because this world contains infinite misery, because it's temporary and subject to change. But because of that fact, we then recognize that its opposite, infinite happiness, enlightenment, which is, they always say, enlightenment, it's the permanent happiness, the permanent peace. That permanent happiness and permanent peace can only exist because of the temporary nature of the chaos and the turmoil, the sadness and the misery of reality. So the one thing that is often used to try and disprove the divine, which is how can the divine exist if bad things happen in the world, ultimately actually proves its opposite point. So what to do? Can we ever make reality a nice, happy place? Well, if enough people woke up to this consciousness, to recognizing that you are this consciousness, you are the consciousness that witnesses life. You are the consciousness that witnesses the body and brain, but you are not the body and brain yourself. If everybody woke up to that, it would be peace on earth as it is in heaven. Open the window because it's getting pretty warm in here. I think that's about everything for today. Team, before I literally bake, it's like a sauna in here. I'm actually nicely simmering away here. I'm actually cooking. Thank you so much for watching, team. I think that's everything today. I'm sure we'll have some fantastic debates in the comment section. I have this real nagging feeling that there was a point I meant to make during that video that I haven't gotten around to making. If so, I'll just make another video and throw it in as an addendum. If not, maybe we'll pop it in the comments. I hope some of that has made some kind of sense. As I say, these are concepts that it's almost impossible to talk about without heavily relying on metaphors, because the mind is the temporary, ever-changing phenomena. The mind doesn't want to know this stuff, because once the mind knows this stuff, it vanishes, and it's trying to keep its job for as long as possible. So that's why the mind is going to go all over the place and go, yeah, but what about this, what about that, what about this? But you see, this understanding, when you come to this understanding, that consciousness is the space in which everything appears, there are no further questions, because you recognize every question is just another one of those temporary phenomena arriving and then falling. So you realize that, well, there's no point to any of this. There's no point to thinking. Thanks so much for watching, team. And thank you so much for taking a look at this. If you are engaged in the spiritual awakening process, the more awake people we have, the more conscious people we can have on this planet, the better things are going to get. So, my gratitude to you for continuing with your spiritual awakening, your spiritual journey. My utmost gratitude to you for watching this video. I hope some of it's been useful, hope some of it's been beneficial, and I'll catch you next time. Take care, be well, and stay present.